Last week I was talking about, or ended up talking about, ordinary angry people protesting at other ordinary frightened people inside asylum hotels. And said, this is wrong. This is wrong. That's a judgment. So how does that fit with a lot of the sense that we get from Zen about only avoid picking and choosing, no judgment? Blue Cliff Record, case 2. Zhao taught the assembly the ultimate path is not difficult if you avoid picking and choosing. As soon as there's talking, there's picking and choosing, and it's pure clarity. Yet this old monk does not abide in pure clarity. Do you cherish it or do you not? A monk asked, since you do not abide in pure clarity, what do you cherish? Zhao replied, I also don't know. And Zhao is actually there undermining, cutting the ground out from the idea that what we're after is pure clarity. And obviously, if we do avoid picking and choosing, if we never act, we can, in our fancy at least, say in this kind of state of perfect calm. But that's not the real world. And as you said, this old monk himself, the Zen master, doesn't abide in pure clarity. What would be the point of that? That's not a life. So if we're going to speak, if we're going to use words, how are we going to use them? If we're going to judge, how are we going to judge? So if I say that this is wrong, who's actually speaking when this skin bag opens its mouth? In whose name am I speaking? On what authority am I speaking? This practice isn't about being nice. And again, actually it's nice to be nice. I like being nice. But this practice isn't about just minding our peace, not saying anything, just being nice because we don't want to cause trouble. That's not it. Equally, it's not about saying, well, at the level of emptiness, nothing is right, nothing is wrong, no judgment. Well, no. If you get hit by a truck, you get hit by a truck. Emptiness does not mean emptiness in that sense. So if it's not about being nice and not about being empty, we're driven back. How? How are we going to use words? What are we going to mean when we say them? And where do they come from? What are the grounds of this? Well, we could go immediately abstract and philosophical and speculative, but let's get back to the cushion. Let's get back to the zafu. And let's get back to just sitting down for zazen. And let's get back to Barry's number 1 instruction, by which he turns the whole of zazen into a koan. You can't do it wrong. Sit down. You can't do it wrong. But as he says, and nobody believes me. Why? Well, if I sit down and I'm tasking myself with counting my breaths or any other good meditation practice, concentrating, something like that, then I've got something to do. And I've got some kind of measure. I can see either I'm doing this or I'm not doing this to an extent. Or I can believe I'm getting this right or I'm getting this wrong. And our practice of zazen just undercuts that. It says, well, no, whatever shows up, shows up. If it's a thought, it's a thought. If it's a feeling, if it's pure enlightened bliss, it's pure enlightened bliss. So what? Just be whatever is in this moment. And of course, without judgment, without rules, without criteria that we understand for getting it right or getting it wrong, what's the natural thing we do? To a greater or lesser degree, we panic. Immediately, we kind of existential doubt, existential question. What is this? And of course, that's really the point, isn't it? What happens when we take the self-imposed limits to the self away? What happens? We start flailing around, not literally because we're staying still. So the stiller we keep the body, the more the mind moves. And it might move and freeze, or move and fit, or just keep moving. This thought, that thought, that thought. And obviously some of those thoughts are going to be about thoughts of judgment. Am I getting this right? Surely I'm not getting this right. But what is right in this context? It's the kind of thing that in 80s sci-fi movie you could ask a computer and it would blow up. Does not compute. Boom. And it doesn't compute for us, and that's, as I say, that's really the point. But then, of course, the other side of that is we get good at this, we get good at parking this, and we go, no judgment, no judging thought, put that one down. And of course, then we've lost the edge of this. And it's good because we're aware, we're present. But actually, what happens if we don't put that judging thought down? Of course, it's actually brilliant if, for a moment, we find some space, some awareness, some clarity. Because in that sense, in that moment, we actually are putting this hard, crystalline judging shelf down. We're letting it be, literally parking it with the thought. And that's fantastic. But if instead, and this is certainly, it gets more interesting once we get familiar with the practice, and actually we can park a thought if we want to, park that thought. Instead, stay with that thought of judgment and just do what we always do with our practice. Feel into it. How does it feel? Where does it lead? What's it connect up to? Actually, that can start getting interesting, because who's asking about who here? And what are their, on what grounds? Why am I not doing this right? Why do I feel I'm not doing this right? And that may lead on to a thought, a connection. Actually, how does this feel like? What's the actual emotion here? Again, maybe very subtle. Is this connecting up with fear? Insecurity? How about the feeling of judgment itself? Do I feel a little bit clever, a little bit self-righteous at catching myself out? I don't know. Again, that's for you, because it's kind of the same and kind of different for all of us. It's our own experience of the tricks we play, the tricks we want to play to keep the game going, to keep being this being that I am, or one side of that being. Because of course, most of the time, I'm trying to talk about self as relationship, as openness, as meeting, as connection. But here in this circulating judgingness, we're getting a direct experiencing of this other kind of aspect of self. This much more, well, it's social in a different sense, isn't it? Because if most of the time self as relationship, we're talking about how we're made out of each other, how we're connected in this sense. This other sense of self is social in the sense of measuring, comparing. Am I keeping to the rules? How do I measure up? How do I measure up with that person on the next cushion or that person on the cushion over there? What does the teacher think of me? What do I think of them? Chatter, chatter, but measuring, comparison, judgment. And this is the kind of obsessive way in which we tend to judge permanently, constantly. But, in zazen we can, again, it's this laboratory space, controlled conditions. Once we get reasonably aware in our awareness, we can actually begin to let this run, see, where's it go? What's it actually showing me? And I think, I'd certainly argue that we learn to be this kind of self as our kind of admission ticket, literally tickets, birth certificate, qualifications, driving licence, national insurance number, the rest of it, are tickets that measure, identify, specify us, and give us a place. They show us our place, and we know our place, and we affirm our place, this self which is our place, by exercising our judgment, by being this person. I get a right to speak, I get a right to act, I get a right to think. And judgment is a very important part of that. I've been judged. I start off by being judged, a boy or a girl, being judged a citizen or not a citizen. Continues onwards, ever onwards. And of course, because we have a place, our judgments are always appeals to some kind of authority, some kind of external authority, which at one level might be God, probably not for us. Right behaviour, fairness, all kinds of things. None of these are absolutely right, none of these are absolutely wrong. It's all a question of how we use them, how we bring them to bear in our judgments. What's the point of my appeal to this authority, to praise myself, justify myself, condemn myself? And it's quite interesting because, we're always our own best subjects, aren't we? I'm always here. If I bother to pay attention, I can always be vaguely aware of what I'm thinking, not necessarily the subtexts, but those kind of become apparent. And of course, a lot of our judging has this kind of slightly vicious catching ourselves out quality. And that's something we learnt as children. Maybe it was with our siblings or our school companions, friends. It's actually terrifying when you find your own children doing it to you, catching you out, you bang to rights. Oh, terrible. How humiliating, how embarrassing. But it's the game of judgment, it's the game of being the self that I am in this sense. This measuring, judging, rule-governed self, not the self of open relationship, communication, meeting, recognition. We can probably never separate the two entirely, but poles, if you like. And again, when we catch ourselves doing this, and it might be just about our zazen, or it might be that realisation of that memory of when I was a complete idiot, or actually for some reason I've just remembered when I actually did something that was wrong or hurtful or whatever. How does that feel? How does that actually feel physically? How does that feel emotionally? Where does that go? Where does that lead to, and what does that connect to in terms of patterns of other thoughts? Where am I being taken by this? Some of our judgment, what kind of emotions? Humiliation, shaming, embarrassment, all these different flavours. But again, is there this note of vindictive or feigned regretful triumph over catching myself out? Done it again. A sense of lacking, a sense of failure? Or am I self-justifying? Tremendous sense of pride. No, I was right. I am right. Well, okay. How does that feel? How am I experiencing that? How does that play? All of these ways of putting ourselves in our place. Now, the point of this work really is twofold. One, to recognise the splitting that we're doing with ourselves. Who is the judge? Judging me? Well, for Freud it was the superego. How do we think of the superego? Our parents' voice, their parents' voice, the tradition, the law. However we want to call it, it's not simply my voice, it's not simply my judgment. And equally, who is the being that I'm judging, the me that I think is failing, lacking, not getting it right, the me that I'm looking at, got your number, splitting. And again, splitting is what we do, all these different aspects of ourselves. But chanting the at-one-ment gata, can we hold all of this whole? Can we hold all these different aspects of ourselves whole? Allow them their difference, but not separate, damn one, praise another? So that's one side of it. And the other side of it is the absolutely vital part that this has in when we're judging others. If I say something's wrong, is that to catch them out? Is that to show myself how different I am from them? Is it to affirm an issue that we all share? We're all wrong. There's something dreadfully wrong here. How do we fix it? But unless I experience where this is coming from, the different, whether I want to call them different voices, different moods, different experiences, then I'm likely to use this judgment as a separation and a damning, whether it's a separation from part of me, part of you, part of our world. And when we see people doing things which clearly are wrong, this is the question. This is always the question. What do we do? I wish there was an easy answer. But the work that I've been talking about on the cushion is vital to framing any answer when it comes to speak, when it comes to act.